If cars can drive themselves, why can't data? The power of automation extends far beyond automobiles. But self-driving data is a different story. Let's see how the world's most forward-looking companies are automating bits and bytes.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Your host here, Eric Kavanagh, and with me two awesome guests. My longtime friend Malcolm Chisholm is here from Data at Millennium. He's way down in El Salvador today, checking out the scenery. And then our good friend Marek Ovchacek of Atacama, dialing in from Toronto. And we're going to talk about self-driving data, and we're going to talk about probably a little bit about data quality fabric at some point. But first, I want to give our audience some input and some background on what we mean when we talk about self-driving data. So obviously, we have autonomous cars these days. We have autonomous little robots in our home. The little robots that do vacuuming around your house are autonomous. Lots of autonomous technology. It's automation, right? Well, automation is the cornerstone of software. Every software application you've ever bought or used automated something. And so that's what these technologies do. They automate something. And what we're seeing these days with so much data being generated by machines, by computers, obviously, by people moving around, by sensors, all sorts of different sources of data, and so much data that companies want to ingest, to manage, to pull in to their analytical systems, whether it's a data lake or a data warehouse or just some analytical application. Maybe it's some operational application. You want to pull in data just to share. Well, what we're seeing in this self-driving data management space is very interesting and very compelling. And I think it's coming just in time, quite frankly, because we have such a tremendous need. And so what's happening is there are companies like Atacama. Look those folks up. Very, very cool technology. It's Ataccama. Look those folks up online. They talk about self-driving data management. So what you can do is you have systems that can learn over time, and they figure out whether it's by user or by data type or by schema or whatever. When this data shows up, they make suggestions to you. And this is really cool, by the way. You're seeing this in a lot of other big companies. Google does this now in your emails. If you probably noticed, if you're typing an email in a browser in the Google client, a lot of times it'll suggest the next few words for you, which is based upon language and syntax, but also based upon you and your profile. So they'll track, because I know I have a daughter who has a somewhat unordinary name. Aleshka is her name. Not too many kids named Aleshka. There are some out there, and it knows now if I type AL, it's like, oh, Aleshka? Yes, that's right. So that's a recommendation. And this is what's cool about a lot of the self-driving technology, is that it's not just automating the process necessarily, but it's giving you a recommendation. So you're seeing this all over the place now. Google is doing it. Some of the other big enterprise software companies are doing it, where you're getting suggestions of things to do, like people to connect with or whatever, tasks to undertake, and you can accept or reject them. That's a very cool kind of automation, because maybe this time it's not Aleshka. Maybe it's my friend Alan that I want to write a letter to, right? So you don't necessarily want to hard code that automation into everything. You want to give the user a chance to select. Yes, I want to do that, or no, I don't want to do that. And that's what we're seeing. But again, the systems learn over time. So that's the really cool thing, is that human beings are repetitive creatures. We're creatures of habit. And when you start to analyze your own data, you can see just how habitual you are. Your phone, your iPhone, or even your Samsung, and there are all these apps on there now that will track what you're doing, where you're going, how many steps you've taken, how much usage you have. And when you can kind of see that yourself through that lens, it's a pretty revealing experience. But the point is, we're fairly habitual creatures. And so it's not that difficult to predict what we're going to do. And therefore, it's not that difficult to predict what you want to do with data. But with that opening, let me bring in Marek Ovchacek from Atacama. Marek, you've been working on this stuff for a long time now, for over a decade, I believe. And of course, Atacama is big in the data governance space, which is a very unwieldy space, quite frankly. It's hard to govern data. So tell us a bit about yourself and Atacama and what you folks are working on in this space of so-called self-driving data management.
Hi, thank you, Eric. Yeah, so as you mentioned, people are creatures of habit, right? And we in Atacama, we started working on a data management and data governance because we saw kind of an opportunity to make it better, not for just us, but for everyone, right? Like we started in Atacama by actually delivering projects on other technologies, right? We were a consulting company, right? Like we just used whatever was out there or whatever the customer had. In this case, mostly customers in like financial sector, like big banks or, you know, other like insurance companies and stuff like that. And we use that to kind of deliver little bits of project. Let's say you need to run a campaign in the past that was usually, you know, sending flyers to people or sending some you know, text messages, stuff like that, right? And you need to first go over all your systems and find where you have the data. Then you need to figure out if your data is actually accurate and how fresh it is, and then you can, you know, run further analytics on it. Now, where we actually started to think about our own software is because, as you mentioned, people are people, and people are lazy, and we were lazy as well, right? So to make our life easier, we started building this, you know, little bits of applications to you know, automate a lot of these tasks that we are doing. And certainly we went to the point where we actually built certain software offering that was big enough and good enough to start selling on its own. And from that point, we start selling. I think in general, our kind of main principle is to make as much of the process automated as we can to help actually the end user, right? You know, getting to the data, to the correct data faster is what drives innovation in any industry. And we figured out that a lot of the processes that we are doing on every project over and over again, and I've seen this over the year, every time I deliver projects, I'm doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. A lot of that things can be automated, and it doesn't necessarily at the beginning needs to be like any sophisticated AI or ML. You can actually, if you are in an organization like that, you can automate a lot of the processes manually. We call that principle something like expert system, where you actually know what you want to automate, you know what you're doing. We just add extra experience to that process to know all the outliers, all the different you know, paths that you can take to get to the result, and mm-hmm. automate that, right? So basically that's the whole principle, right?
Yeah, and this is really good because, to your point, and so let's kind of dive into workflow, which is, you know, a fancy word for the work that you have to do in your day job to get something done. And what I love about the mobile movement, if you will, is that it forced UI designers, user interface designers, to get a lot more lean in terms of what they put forward and what they offer you in terms of options. And I think some of that is now spilling back into the desktop world, where we've realized that, you know, the old Adobe Photoshop layout is really not optimal for most business applications. Because in Adobe Photoshop and the, you know, earlier versions, or even later versions, you've got like 12 menu items with anywhere from 10 to 40 options under each one of them. And it's like, oh my God, where do I go from here? I got all these options. Well, in any particular situation, there are only so many things that you can do. And so it makes sense to limit what the options are on the screen to what someone can actually do. And if you map that then to the functionality that needs to get done, to the business processes that need to be enabled, you can really start to sort of scale down, if you will, the navigation path for someone to get something done. But in your case, with Atacama, what you've done is you've thought through, okay, this data's coming in, where could it possibly go? This particular user who's logged in, what do they typically do? And you can monitor that in the system and then kind of make some suggestions of what to do next. Oh, you've loaded this CSV file. The last time you had a CSV file with this header, you sent it to that particular system over there. Is that what you want to do? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So this is actually an interesting example, right? So this is where we are slowly going to, right? I'm not claiming we are fully there, right? I'm not gonna be that guy, but that's the kind of angle, and we see first results of that approach that are very, very positive. Basically, as you mentioned, the user interface needs to be as decluttered as possible, and that is the principle that needs to stay there. But what changes with the underlying metadata, with the underlying actually, that information you have, what you did with the file last time, what you did with actually not the file, but this kind of information. It's not always again about the technical metadata. That's additional kind of input that user interface should be able to reflect, right? That still keeps the user interface, very minimal, very straightforward, but change it based on whatever the user is doing, right? So instead of having these 80 options, and you actually can see it in your example in Adobe Photoshop, instead of having these 80 options right now, when you start working on some specific action in Adobe Photoshop, let's say you use the intelligent selection tool, then suddenly the right options that you would want to use next pops up on the top of the menu. So that same goes for data governance. If you use the let's say if you import the data from certain database or certain location, even the options should pop up for you based on the actions, not only by you but by other users in the organization.
That's right.
Now, yeah, and this is where actually the most challenge is coming from, because if you compare it to like Photoshop, they have literally like millions and millions of users, right? Since they fully went to the cloud offering, everybody is connected. They have actions from basically the whole user base, or most of the user base, right?
Right.
Now, if you are selling enterprise software, you only have actions from that specific customer, and you need to have very small, intelligent subroutines, analyzing those actions to be able to adapt as fast as possible. I'm not saying the sharing of this kind of information between customers is not possible. It is. We actually have customers who agree to share these anonymous statistics, but that only gets you so far, right? So this is kind of a biggest challenge of the data governance, especially in the enterprise level, that it needs to be able to learn from minimal amount of user actions.
Interesting.
Right? It needs to be really fast, opposed to the other applications out there.
Yeah, and so if you just step back, folks, and think about this, the productivity gains will be tremendous, because it's funny, a lot of times when, especially if you're good at your job, you lose an appreciation for how much time it takes to actually do stuff, because you just kind of get into the moment and you're working and you're doing your thing, you're sending emails and you're in the app and you're doing whatever, and then it's lunchtime, you take a break and you go back and you're working, etc. I challenge anyone out there to just sit down at the end of the day and think, okay, what did I do today? And just try to come up with a quick synopsis. It's hard to do, especially if you're really invested in what you're doing. And so the point is, there's a lot of tedium, a lot of tedious workflow that is inherent in just about every job these days. And in that tedium, you will find a couple different things. One is boredom, frankly. Two is frustration. Three is just errors. Basically, you're gonna make mistakes. People make mistakes all the time. I made a mistake a couple days ago, annoyed the crap out of me. I sent an email out, it had an old date on it. I'm like, it makes me nuts, But there's a lot of this tedium. If you can automate, and like you said, and this is a crucial component, Merrick, if you can sense who the user is, what they normally do, where they are in a certain process, and then only show to them the functions that are relevant to them right then, that's extremely powerful. Because number one, now you're not going to make a mistake and choose one of the other 87 options that you don't need right now. And it also just expedites the process, right? You click OK, and you're on. That's where I was going with the suggestions thing. You see a recommendation come in, do you want to do this or not? Yes, I do. And if you don't, that's fine. Then you go through and you do the manual stuff, but usually it's going to be yes. And so you just boom, yes, boom, yes, boom, yes, and you're off to the next thing. You're a happy worker, a busy worker, a productive worker. I mean, there's a ton of benefit that accrues from this, right, Merrick?
Sorry. Yeah, actually, you're right. But I would just like to kind of expand on that. It goes actually beyond the suggestions. What is interesting about the data governance and automating any data governance processes is that usually you can, instead of making a suggestion, you can present user with the answer directly. Like, so for example, instead of suggesting to user, do you want to actually merge these two tables together? You can tell them, hey, I merged these two tables together for you. Look at the results. This may be what you want to do, right? And this is just the data. It's a sandbox kind of environment. You are not, affecting anything, and the only thing that you are spending is, cents for a computational power. But it gets user with a more clear idea of what's happening, which is sometimes not that easy with the data governance, right? If you say, do you want to deduplicate this table on 7 different attributes, they have usually not a clear idea what will come out of that process. So going step further and pre-computing the result, and so actually showing, instead of suggestion and option, showing the direct result. That's where we are going. That's where we are actually going with our data quality fabric offering, where we are just putting in data quality into the data or in any kind of operation automatically, and just presenting user with the results. They don't have to use it. We are not forcing them, but it doesn't change. It has a lot of value for the results.
Yeah. Well, and just to share with our audience here, data governance, and we'll get into this deeper in the next segment, data governance is more important now than ever with regulations like GDPR, like CCPA. There are more coming. There was one that was proposed in New York, the state of New York, which failed, but was even more strict than CCPA. And, these regulations carry serious fines, but just in general, I think I talk about the right to be respected. And I think it's wise for organizations to be very careful about how they use your data and what they do with your data. And remember that you are the customer, or maybe the prospect or the partner. And we want to be respectful of other people's information, of privacy, and so on and so forth. And data governance rules can be very complex. So if you can bake those rules into the information systems that you're using, that really facilitates compliance, because it gets baked right into the system of record, the system that's actually doing something. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll bring in Malcolm Chisholm of Data Millennium, and we'll bring back Merrick in the next segment. Talking all things self-driving data. I just love this topic. When I first heard of it, I was like, oh, that's cool. Let's find out what these guys are doing. And next up on our show, Malcolm Chisholm of Data Millennium. Malcolm, you've been around for a couple of years now. You've seen the ups and downs in the data management industry, and to me, this is very exciting stuff. I mean, I think we're really onto something here, and it's good because we can get past the real boring, tedious stuff, which is all that data engineering, connecting the pipes, getting it all set up to where you can do the analytics. It's the analytics that's fun. That's the interesting stuff. Data engineering is interesting too, if you're that kind of person. But at a certain point, you want to get on to the next thing and get this thing done. But anyway, what are your thoughts about self-driving data? And then feel free to ask Merrick some questions.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I think this is something that's needed. I mean, there's all kinds of issues. We're living in the golden age of data. Data is at the core of many, many things. It's been increasingly at the heart of business models. So how do we deal with it if everything we have to do around it is manual? I think of situations where, sort of in the past where I've done projects, you need to get IT involved, you need to get a business analyst, you have to explain to the business analyst what the business problem is. They don't know the business domain, and you hope that translation bridge sort of goes across to the data engineers, and that they're going to deal with things appropriately in time, and there's no automation there. The same thing also occurs in projects with source data analysis, and I think you guys were talking about this earlier. Okay, I want to do something with the data, I got to understand it. How are we going to do that? And it's typically, get the users to tell us their requirements, and then we'll go away and solution as well. What does that mean in terms of source data analysis? It's kind of meaningless. How do you do it? So you've got these problems, which I think are reliant on sort of, to be frank, like 1960s project approaches, with a lot of manual intervention, not that much domain talent lying around vis-a-vis the business, but the business guys if they can have this automated for them, I think they're going to be in a much better position to do the analytics, to do all the things that they need to do. So, and I think there's a few things that I would like to ask Marek about that I'm seeing. Not quite so much the interaction between AI and the data user, as it were, which I think is important, but thinking about the data ecosystem or the production data landscape in general. I mean, there's a lot more data now. We're seeing things like, IoT type data from sensors or just from data content flying around. There's complexity. Things are more complex. Maybe that's the result of 60 years of organic growth in our data architectures, layering thing on thing on thing on thing. And then lastly, timeliness. People need to be able to react to situations faster than we've had in the past, done in the past. Those are all things that we, that occur to me, and I'd like to have Marek's viewpoint on scale, complexity, timeliness, how self-driving data kind of interacts with them.
Yeah, it's a good point here. All right, so let me start with I'm kind of gonna catch on some of the things you say. Firstly, this translation layer between, you say, engineers and the business specialists, let's say. We know that there is a problematic, and there is actually, in my opinion, where a lot of that slowdown is happening, right? Because the business specialist says they need something, data engineer interpret it differently. Data engineer know some specifics about the data. Business analysts don't know about that, or interprets it differently. This is where a lot of these kind of interactions are happening, and it's hinder the process of all of your projects. And also, as you mentioned, the 1960s approach to the project management is where you are actually basically relying on the couple of key people in the organization to be able to bring that subject matter expertise to these projects, and this just doesn't scale, right? Now, why I'm mentioning the translation layer is because that what these people are basically communicating to each other is a metadata about the data, right? Like business users are saying, I need a data set that has these and these characteristics, and the characteristics are defined as, let's say, I have a data set that have IoT information about sensor X, or data from the campaign list. Now, the technical people have a different type of metadata, right? They have metadata as these data are coming in as a stream. These data are coming in, daily, every hour in a batch, right? And they don't understand each other, and B, all of this information is usually saved in different places in the organization. It's basically siloed, right? And it's a metadata, but there is no metadata kind of exchange standard on the human level or on the technical level. Now, where the new systems are coming in, and this is not only about Atacama, but in general about the new approach with what analysts are calling a data fabric, is that one of the major new component there is a centralized metadata management, right? So basically the first step towards making these processes more efficient is to have all this metadata in a common layer, where all the underlying processes understand the structure of that metadata and then can use it. And then you can feed basically that metadata to your machine learning models or expert systems as a data set, right? Since it's already formatted, the systems understand it, you can feed it there. And then you can start building your machine learning or AI models to basically replace a lot of that expert knowledge of the subject matter experts in your organization, and you can skip several stages in your 1960s process where you are managing some data governance project.
Right. One thing that particularly interests me is how we can apply AI to data quality, because I think data quality concerns, and as a practice really pre-existed data governance. It's been around for a very long time, and it seems to be a tough nut to crack, and that would make me suspect that it is amenable to AI type solutions. Is that, do you think, more of a possibility now today than it has been in the past?
Yes, and having a metadata is actually big kind of a key to that, right? For you to be able to automatically run some AI subroutine for data quality, you need to have a lot of metadata about the data for that system to actually choose what to run where, right? Like I don't, it's not that easy to explain, but let's say you have certain subroutines of the AI detection or AI anomaly detection, for which is kind of a data quality automatically based on, let's say, time series data, right? Now, first, you need the metadata to identify where those time series data are, right? Otherwise, you are doing it manually, and then what's the point, right? So things like that, metadata is driving that, and then the automated kind of subroutines of the machine learning AI data quality can be run on top of that. But another note here is that a lot of the times people are looking at this and see it as kind of a holy grail. This is gonna solve my problems, right? This AI data quality, right? A lot of the companies are actually selling it like, you don't need your traditional data quality anymore. You just slap this AI model on top of it, and it will solve your problems, right? It will tell you every time you have incorrect data, it will tell you where it is. It will fix your data for you. Now, that is a nice thinking, but it's not working all the times, right? A lot of the time you have actually pretty strict regulatory requirements that tells you that if you do any kind of standardization, which is a big part of data quality, it needs to be explainable. If you run AI models for standardization, you're out of luck, right?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point.
You need to combine these together with the traditional kind of a data quality approaches to be able to get effective answer.
Yeah, and the human in the loop, right? Let's not forget this. And kind of to your point, Marek, there is not a single silver bullet. There's never going to be, I can't imagine. But we are inching closer, and the key is to have those humans in the loop, monitoring these things, catching mistakes, fixing it multiple times. And folks, you can kind of see this on your iPhone or on your Samsung or whatever, when you're typing something and it corrects something you didn't want to correct, you're like, no, I want it that way. And it does it again. I want it that way. And usually it'll learn on the third time, oh, okay, he wants it that way, even if you don't hit the check button. Folks, thanks again for listening. Once again, look up Malcolm Chisholm, maybe Check. We'll talk to you next time.